Welcome back, guys. Tonight, I'm sharing 10 true, deeply disturbing stories from deep Appalachia, roads that lead somewhere you were never meant to go. But before we continue, if you're new here, make sure to subscribe, and don't forget to like and share. Now, let's begin. My cousin Eli and I took a few days off work to clean out our late uncle's cabin in the hills of Western Virginia, about an hour past a half-forgotten town that barely showed up on GPS. It was mid-October, still warm during the day, but already cooling down fast once the light started fading. That kind of sharp mountain chill that sneaks up on you and sticks around your neck even when you're standing by a fire. Uncle Ray's cabin wasn't much. Calling it a house would have been generous. It leaned slightly to one side with a tin roof that looked like it had survived a few too many storms. Every surface was cluttered with his junk-rusted tools, jars full of screws, mismatched chairs, and the occasional broken radio. He'd been a lifelong hoarder of things that probably only made sense to him. Eli and I borrowed a trailer from his buddy and decided we'd stay out there for a few nights while we sorted through what to keep and what to toss. It sounded like an easy enough job. Honestly, we both thought it might even be kind of relaxing. No phone calls, no work emails, just quiet woods and manual labor. The first 2 days went about how we expected. We'd wake up early, make coffee on the old stove that groaned every time we lit it, then start hauling things out. There were a few decent finds, a wooden rocking chair, some old photographs in a biscuit tin, a weird set of antique keys that didn't fit any lock we could find. Most of it went straight into the trailer. By the third day, we were getting into a rhythm. I was dragging a heavy iron headboard across the yard when I noticed a narrow dirt path behind the tool shed. I stopped, frowning, because I'd been back there before when we first arrived, and I was pretty sure that path hadn't been visible then. "Hey, Eli," I called out. He came around the corner, wiping his hands on a rag. "You ever see this trail?" I asked, pointing toward it. He squinted. "Nope. You?" We both stared at it for a bit. It wasn't just that it looked new, it looked maintained. The dirt was smooth, not like the overgrown trails you find in woods like these. The trees lining it were strange too, paler than the rest, bark almost white with these deep grooves running perfectly straight down, like something had scraped them evenly all the way around. Eli shrugged. "Probably an old hunting path. Maybe Ray used to go out that way." "Doesn't look old," I said. He gave me a look like I was overthinking it. "You want to check it out?" I hesitated, then nodded. "Yeah, before it gets dark." We didn't bring much, just flashlights and our phones, which were already useless this far out. The trail was flatter than I expected, winding gently between the trees, then slowly sloping downhill. The deeper we went, the quieter it got. Not in that peaceful way either, more like the air had thickened. No bugs, no birds, just the sound of our boots on dirt. About 15 minutes in, Eli stopped walking. "Wasn't there a fence back there?" he said, pointing behind us. I turned around. No fence, just trees and brush, but I remembered it too. We'd stepped over it on the way in, a half-collapsed barbed wire fence covered in vines. It had been there, I was sure of it. "It was there," I said slowly. "I think." Eli frowned but didn't argue. We just kept walking, both of us pretending we weren't getting uneasy. The trail narrowed. The trees looked closer together. I brushed against a few low branches that felt damp, like they'd just been rained on, even though the ground was dry. And then we saw the cabin. Not Uncle Ray's. This one was smaller, almost the same layout but older, darker. It leaned inward, like the middle of it was sinking. Parts of the frame looked melted, twisted in weird angles that didn't make sense for wood. "Jesus," Eli muttered. "You think this was his first place or something?" I shook my head. "I don't think so. This doesn't look real." Eli walked right up to it anyway, shining his flashlight through a crack in the door. "Looks empty," he said. I hung back a few steps. Something about it looked wrong from where I was standing. The shadows didn't seem to fall right. Like the light inside the cracks didn't match what he was shining in. Still, he pushed the door open. It didn't even creak, and stepped in. He took maybe 2 steps inside and said, "Just a bunch of," then stopped talking. Completely froze. "What?" I called out. He didn't answer. He just started backing up, one slow step at a time. Behind him, in that sliver of darkness, something moved. I saw it only for a second. A hand, pale and too long, curling around the corner of the wall. It looked human at first glance, but the fingers bent in all the wrong places. Too many joints. I didn't even think. I just turned and ran. Eli was right behind me for the first few seconds. I could hear him breathing, but when I looked over my shoulder, he was gone. The trail ahead looked wrong. The slope was steeper, turning left instead of right. My legs felt heavier, like the ground was pulling at me. I stopped for a second to listen, and that's when I heard footsteps. Slow, deliberate ones coming from up ahead. Not Eli. He's a big guy. His steps are heavy. These were careful, almost soft. Then, from that same direction, I heard my own voice. Not someone calling my name, my exact voice, repeating the same thing I'd said earlier. Eli, this way, same pitch, same tone. It was like hearing a recording of myself from a few minutes ago. That broke me. I turned around and sprinted in the opposite direction. I didn't care if it was the right way or not. I just ran until I saw light through the trees. The first thing I saw was the trailer, but it wasn't parked beside the cabin anymore. It was tilted at the edge of the woods, like it had been dropped there from a few feet up. The hitch was buried in mud. Eli was standing beside it, covered in dirt, gasping for air. "We're done," he said. "We just got in the truck and drove. We never went back to finish the job. Uncle Ray's land is probably still in the family's name, but no one's touched it since." That October, my cousin asked me to look after her cabin while she was out working a job in Fairview. She'd just bought the place a few months before. A small, one-bedroom cabin tucked way up a ridge trail in Carter County, surrounded by trees so thick you couldn't see another roofline in any direction. The only road up was gravel all the way, twisting and steep, with ditches deep enough to swallow a tire if you weren't careful. GPS dropped off halfway, and the cell signal might as well have been a myth. Her nearest neighbor was a guy named Dennis who lived half a mile down, a quiet older man who mostly kept to himself. I figured a week out there would do me good. I'd been working long hours at my job in Lexington and needed a break from screens, noise, and people. My cousin stocked a pantry before she left, cans, rice, instant coffee, and the cabin had a wood stove that kept the chill out. I brought a stack of books and a deck of cards, expecting the kind of peaceful boredom people romanticize but rarely get. The days were slow in a good way. I'd wake up to the sound of wood settling in the stove, feed the fire, make coffee, and sit on the porch while the sun climbed over the ridge. The air smelled sharp and earthy, and the trees were deep orange and gold. It felt like living inside a photograph. I'd chop firewood, sweep the porch, maybe hike a bit down to the creek. By night, I'd read by lantern light until my eyes got heavy. It stayed that way until Sunday. Around dusk, I was out back splitting kindling when I heard a sound that didn't fit. At first, I thought it was someone calling, faint, like a person shouting from far off across a canyon. I froze, axe still in hand, and waited. The sound faded almost as soon as it came. I figured it was Dennis, or maybe a hunter. Hunting season wasn't far off, though I hadn't seen a single truck or heard a gunshot since I got there. A few crows burst out of the trees, wings clattering, then everything went still again. That kind of silence that presses against your ears. I stood there for a minute longer, then shrugged it off and went inside. An hour later, I was reading when I heard it again. 2 notes, rising soft, distant but not quite human, not quite animal either. It made the hair on my arms lift. I listened for a while. It didn't come again. I shut the windows, locked the door, and told myself it was some kind of bird. I didn't believe it, but I didn't want to think harder about it either. The next morning, I noticed something odd. The porch swing was moving. There was no wind, no breeze at all. The air was still enough that smoke from the stove chimney went straight up, but the swing swayed gently, creaking on its chain. When I stepped closer, the metal was warm from the sun. I gave it a little nudge, and it kept swinging longer than it should have. That afternoon, I took my cousin's old hunting dog, Daisy, out for a walk. She was a slow, graying thing who loved to nose around in the leaves. We followed the property line, looping behind the ridge. When we hit the north side, Daisy froze. One moment she was sniffing the ground, and the next her head shot up, tail stiff, her ears pinned back. She didn't growl or bark, just stood there trembling, eyes locked on the tree line below. I called her name once, twice. She didn't move. Then suddenly she bolted, full sprint, tail tucked tight between her legs, straight back toward the cabin. That's when I felt it. That creeping, prickling sense that something was watching me. I turned around slowly, scanning the woods. Nothing. Just trees, leaves, the slow shift of light. The sky had that burnt orange hue October gets before dark, but I swear I could feel eyes on me. I walked faster on the way back. By the time I reached the cabin, I was breathing too hard and sweating through my shirt even though it was cool out. That night, I kept the lantern burning longer than usual. I didn't want to sit in the dark. Around 10, the flame started to gutter, and I decided not to light another. I sat on the couch, staring out the window. You could see the trees silhouetted against the sky, jagged black lines and patches of gray where the clouds moved. Then something shifted. Just a flicker of movement, low and quick, like someone crouched on the porch and moved from one side to the other. Daisy lifted her head and made this quiet, trembling whine. She didn't bark. She didn't even move. Just stared straight at the door, her body rigid. Then came 2 taps on the window. Light, deliberate, not like a branch brushing the glass, cleaner than that. I didn't move. I sat there, barely breathing. My pulse felt too loud in my ears. 10 seconds passed. 20. No more taps. I told myself it was a raccoon, even though raccoons don't knock. I didn't sleep much that night. The next morning, the woods were completely silent. The kind of silence that makes you check if your ears are working. No birds, no insects. Even the air felt heavy, like sound couldn't travel through it. When I went out back to split wood, I found something that didn't make sense. A single muddy footprint on the chopping block. Barefoot, adult-sized, perfectly centered. No trail leading up to it, no prints around it, just one. I stared at it for a long time, then picked up the axe and carried it inside. That night, I didn't turn on any lights. I just sat in the dark with Daisy lying beside me, the axe across my knees. My palms wouldn't stop sweating. Every little noise, a creak, a drip, made my shoulders tense. Around 2 in the morning, I heard it again. The porch boards creaked, one slow step, then another. My stomach dropped. Something moved past the window. Low, hunched, crawling, but upright. It wasn't the way a person moves. It was too controlled, too deliberate, like it was testing each step. Daisy started growling, low and steady. It was a sound I'd never heard from her before. I didn't wait to see more. I grabbed her by the collar, opened the back door, and slipped out into the dark. The air was cold enough to sting my lungs. I didn't dare use a flashlight. I just went by memory, boots crunching on the trail. Daisy kept up beside me, silent except for her breathing. The woods felt wrong, too still, too close. Every branch I brushed sounded like a gunshot. It took 20 minutes to reach Dennis's house, though it felt longer. When his porch light came into view, I almost laughed from relief. He opened the door before I even finished knocking, took one look at me, wild-eyed, covered in leaves, clutching an axe, and just said, "Come in." He didn't ask much that night. Made me tea, gave me a blanket, let Daisy curl up by the heater. He called the sheriff in the morning. When they went up to the cabin, everything was locked, nothing missing. No signs of anyone breaking in. But the porch swing was gone, and right in front of the door was a neat little circle made of deer teeth. That was the last night I ever spent up there. I was 14 when it happened. My aunt had to go up to Cincinnati for surgery, and since my mom was working night shifts at the cannery in Fairview, she asked her cousin Lorna to take care of me for a few weeks. I'd never met Lorna before. Mom said she lived just past the ridge in a place called Gray Hollow, and that she and my aunt used to be as close as sisters when they were kids. That was enough for her, which meant it had to be enough for me too. Her cabin sat crooked on a patch of rocky ground halfway swallowed by weeds and hornbeam trees. It looked like it had been built in a hurry and never finished. No phone, no TV, not even electricity, except for a single kerosene lamp that flickered whenever she walked by it. The air inside was thick with the smell of smoke and boiled vegetables. I remember the floor creaking every time I breathed too loud, like the house didn't appreciate company. That first night, she told me I'd be sleeping up in the loft. She stayed downstairs, snoring like a buzzsaw chewing through wet wood. The windows didn't close all the way, and the wind kept pulling dead leaves across the floorboards, scratching and rattling all night. Every sound echoed. I didn't sleep much, just watched the lamp flame twitch on the walls until it went out. By the third day, I started noticing things that didn't sit right. For one, she never once called me by my name, always just boy. At first, I figured she'd forgotten, but after a few days, I realized she knew it and just wouldn't use it. When she thought I wasn't listening, she'd mutter under her breath, sometimes what sounded like prayers, other times just words I didn't recognize. When I asked her when Mom was coming to get me, she told me my mother owed her a debt, and I'd be staying until it balanced out. I remember laughing, thinking she was joking, but she didn't even crack a smile. Her rules came next. At first, they were strange but simple. Don't open the cellar, don't go near the spring after dark, don't ask questions. Then, as the days passed, she started adding new ones. Don't hum in the house, don't sleep facing the ladder, and never throw salt outside. I broke the salt rule by accident. I was helping her cook, and I spilled a handful off the table. The salt scattered across the dirt floor, and she went completely still. Then she made me go outside, kneel in the yard, and hold a flat rock above my head until my arms gave out. My shoulders burned so bad I started crying. That was when she told me if I ever cried again, she'd put me in the room. I didn't know what that meant, but the way she said it made my stomach twist. The first real trouble started about a week later, when she told me we were going to play a game. She called it chase. After dinner, she blew out the lamp, locked the front door, and told me that if I wanted breakfast in the morning, I had to find her before sunrise. "I'll be below," she said. "If you find me, you eat. If not, you go hungry." I didn't know what to do. I thought maybe she was testing me, so I tried. I climbed down from the loft in the dark, feeling along the wall, whispering her name. The house was dead quiet except for the sound of the stove ticking as it cooled. My hands brushed against furniture, the rough edge of the table, the cold handle of a pot. Then I heard a creak behind me, and another. I turned around, but I couldn't see a thing. My heart was beating so loud it almost drowned out the next sound. Her voice, right behind me, soft enough that her breath moved the hair on the back of my neck. Too slow. I ran. Didn't think, didn't look. I just scrambled up the ladder to the loft and curled up on the cot, shaking. She didn't follow. She just laughed. Not loud, not crazy, just steady. Slow and steady. It went on for what felt like forever. The next morning, she handed me a jar of lard and said, "Winners eat." That became the routine. Every night, she'd blow out the lamp, lock the door, and disappear. Every morning, I'd wake up to the smell of beans or cornbread, and she'd act like nothing had happened. I lost track of days. It could have been a week or a month. The trees outside never changed much, and the sun barely reached the hollow. I stopped crying after the third game. She said crying drew them close. When I asked who they were, she said, "The ones that don't like to be seen." That was the last time I asked questions. The cellar was the only part of the house with a real door. She kept it locked with a heavy padlock and only opened it to fetch jars during the day. Every time she went down, she'd lock it again from the outside. I once asked what she kept in there, and she said, "That's where I put the ones who don't learn." I didn't ask twice. One night, I decided not to play her game. I waited until she blew out the lamp, then crawled under the cot and stayed there, trying to breathe as quietly as possible. The floor creaked once, then stopped. The silence stretched on so long I thought maybe she'd gone outside. But when I climbed down hours later, the dust on the floor was covered in footprints, bare feet, but not human. Too wide. The toes were long and curled inward, like claws pressed into the wood. The prints circled the ladder over and over, never leading away. The next morning, she didn't speak at all, just stared at me while I ate cold beans from a tin bowl. Her eyes didn't blink much. That night she said, "No game tonight. Tonight you go in the room." Before I could say anything, she grabbed my wrist and dragged me to the cellar door. I kicked, tried to pull free, but she was stronger than she looked. She unlocked the padlock and shoved me down the stairs. I hit the ground hard. The air down there was damp and heavy, thick with the smell of dirt and iron. She didn't lock the door behind me. Somehow that scared me more. It was dark, so dark it felt solid. I couldn't see my own hands, but I could hear breathing. Slow, wet, uneven breathing, coming from somewhere to my right. I pressed myself into the corner, barely daring to move. Something brushed against my leg. I froze. Then it slid across my foot. My whole body went numb. Then I heard it, a sound like someone smiling. Not a laugh, not words, just the feeling of a grin right in front of me. I don't remember anything after that. When I woke up, I was lying outside the cabin, dirt packed under my nails and something sticky on my hands. The morning light was weak and yellow. Lorna was standing on the porch, calm as ever. "You came out on your own," she said. "That means it likes you." That was the last time I saw her. When Mom picked me up, she said I smelled like smoke and vinegar. I didn't talk for 3 days. She thought I was just homesick, but when I finally spoke, all I said was that I didn't want to go back to the mountains. Ever. We never mentioned Lorna again. Mom stopped taking the long way home that passed the ridge. And no matter where I live, I still make sure I never sleep facing the door. I'd been doing part-time work with a small trail crew out in the hills near Dovewell County, West Virginia. It was quiet work, the kind that makes you forget about time. Most of the crew were guys like me, seasonal hires, who didn't mind being out of signal range and eating canned beans for lunch. One of our regular clients was this older vet, everyone called Uncle Ray. Nobody seemed to know if he was actually anyone's uncle, but that's just what stuck. He lived way off-grid, up a narrow logging road past an old fire lookout that hadn't been used since the 80s. On October 5th, he called in a job, said he needed help with a gravity well. I figured it was another one of his weird projects. The guy was always tinkering. He'd once built a stove out of an engine block. The pay was good though, and the weather hadn't turned bad yet, so I took it. 3 of us went up, me, a guy named Mason, and our new crew lead, Derek. We parked where the dirt trail ended and hiked the rest. Ray met us halfway down with his old ATV, the kind that looked like it had survived a war seat, torn, metal rusted, half the paint gone. He grinned through a missing tooth and said, "Glad you boys came quick." It's starting to breathe again. I laughed because that's just the kind of nonsense he'd say. But Mason and Derek didn't. They just gave each other that look people get when they're realizing maybe they shouldn't have volunteered. When we got up to his place, the first thing I noticed was the hole. It sat right behind the cabin, about 20 feet wide, perfectly round, with stone laid into the sides like someone had been building a well. Only it wasn't deep like a well. It sloped down in a spiral, almost elegant in a way. Around the edge were these rusted metal handles, evenly spaced like the numbers on a clock. Ray said it was called a pressure spiral. I asked what it was for, and he said, "October's when the ground lets go. You've got to pin it back down before it moves." Then he started passing out gear helmets, old canvas harnesses, and these filter masks connected to long rubber hoses that ran back up to a steel drum. Mason snorted and said, "What is this, some kind of moonshine bunker?" But Ray didn't laugh. He just said, "You'll want the air steady once you're in. The deeper you go, the less it wants to stay put." I didn't know what that meant, but I took the mask anyway. The air coming from that pit already felt off, warm, damp, and heavy, like something was exhaling from underground. Derek went first, climbing down slowly along the handles. There wasn't a rope or ladder, just the spiral itself. You had to hunch and keep one hand on the wall to keep balance. Mason followed. I went last, tightening the mask over my face. The deeper we got, the quieter it got. You couldn't hear the woods anymore. The world above just disappeared. There was only the sound of our boots scuffing on rock and the steady pull of our breath through the tubes. After a while, the walls started to change. At first, they looked carved stone. Then they started to look smoothed, worn, like they'd been polished by hands over years. Someone had scratched little marks into them. Names. Lines. Lines. One said Danner, another said Eloise, and a few were just symbols, circles crossed with lines, triangles inside triangles. By then, I couldn't see Derek anymore. Mason was just a shadow ahead of me. I saw him stop and look back. His voice came muffled through the mask. "You hear that?" I didn't. He tilted his head like he was trying to listen harder. "Sounds like someone breathing, but not us." I tried to hear it, but all I caught was the sound of my own air, that faint rhythmic hiss. Still, the way he said it made me glance behind me. The spiral made everything feel close, too close, like the walls were leaning in. Then my mask hissed once, sharp, like a valve snapping open, and then nothing. No air, just silence. I held my breath, tapped the filter, nothing happened. I tugged the hose, thinking maybe it had kinked or come loose, but it was still attached. The air just wasn't there anymore. Mason started waving at me. I could see from his movements that his hose wasn't working either. I gestured upward, and we both started to climb back. That's when the air changed. It felt thicker, heavier, like I was moving underwater. My ears popped. The light from above dimmed until it was barely a circle. Then Mason froze. He was staring down past me, mouth open behind his mask. I turned and saw Derek coming back up, but his neck was bent to one side, like he'd fallen and snapped it. He was still walking though, slowly, one foot dragging, one arm swinging limp. Mason shouted his name. Derek didn't react, just kept moving. Behind him, something else shifted. It wasn't a person, not really. It didn't walk, didn't move like anything with joints. It was just there, at the bottom of the spiral, too wide to fit the space, too dark to belong. Like the hole was trying to take shape and couldn't decide what to be. That's when I ran. I climbed as fast as I could, gripping the handles, scraping my palms raw. The mask kept pulling at my face, like something wanted it off. I didn't care. My lungs burned, and the air felt heavier the higher I got, which didn't make sense. I could feel the stone under my boots vibrating, a low hum rising through the rock. Then I saw light. Ray was at the edge, crouched over the opening with a wrench in his hand. As soon as I reached him, he grabbed my harness and hauled me out like I weighed nothing. He didn't ask about the others, didn't look down the pit. Just bolted the lid shut, 3 heavy locks, one after the other, then dragged over a steel plate and started welding it closed. Sparks flew everywhere. When he finished, he went to a barrel, dumped all the masks and hoses in, and lit them on fire. The rubber stank as it burned. I stood there watching, shaking without realizing it. He didn't say anything for a while. Finally, he muttered, "You can stay the night if you want. Don't go walking after dark. It moves easier then." I didn't argue. I slept on his couch, or tried to. Every time I started to drift off, I heard faint popping noises from outside, metal flexing, like the ground was breathing again. Around 3 in the morning, I heard the lid creak. Ray didn't even flinch. He just sat in a chair near the door, shotgun resting across his knees, eyes open but glassy, like he'd done this before. When the sun came up, I left. I was 34 when I picked up a last-minute logging job just west of a place called Russell Fork, Virginia. The temperature was dropping, leaves were brittle underfoot, and I figured the season was basically over. Then I got a call from Clenny. He was an older contractor I'd worked with once or twice before. Soft-spoken, always wore denim even in 90-degree heat, and he had this way of making everything sound like it wasn't urgent even when it clearly was. He told me he had a short contract to finish, just a small cut on leased land that needed clearing before the weather turned. Said it'd just be me, a guy named Kiever, and a diesel skidder. He was offering double pay for 5 days of work, maybe 6. I asked him where exactly this job was, and he chuckled in that slow, wheezy way he had. "Deep woods," he said. "No signal, no problem." I should have asked more questions, but double pay is double pay, and I'd done solo jobs before. I figured it would be like the others. Quiet, boring, out of the way. No boss breathing down my neck. I packed up my gear, drove my beat-up Tacoma out past the last bit of paved road, and kept going until the GPS quit on me. After that, I was on my own with the folded-up paper map Clenny had given me. The directions were scribbled on the back of a gas station receipt. It took me 2 tries and a stop at a broken gate to figure out I was even on the right forest road. Kiever had gotten there first. He'd hauled in a small camper trailer, one of those dented aluminum boxes from the 90s, and set it up in the middle of a clearing that looked like someone had been yanking out teeth. Stumps everywhere. Sawdust still fresh. He had a tank of water rigged to gravity feed into the camper's sink and a little propane stove bungee corded to the step. Real rustic setup. Kiever was older than me, late 50s maybe. Real lean guy, all sharp elbows and smoker's hands. When I pulled up, he was sitting on an overturned bucket drinking coffee out of a chipped enamel mug. He nodded at me, said something about the cold settling in fast, and that was about it. We weren't going to be swapping stories by the fire, and that was fine by me. First couple days were smooth, like clockwork. Kiever was efficient with a chainsaw, knew his cuts, didn't waste time. I handled the skidder. My job was to drag the logs down the hill to the edge of a winding switchback, where Clenny would send a truck to pick them up later. The weather was crisp, the woods were dry, and the machines ran well enough. The third day is when things got weird. That afternoon, Keever flagged a new cut site up on the east ridge. I brought the skidder around the long way. Terrain was steep and soft in places, and when I got there, I saw him just standing. Not working, just staring through the trees with his helmet in his hand. I followed his gaze and saw it. A clearing, but not like the others. It was strange, almost perfectly round, maybe 20 feet across, and totally bare, no underbrush. No weeds, no moss, just hard, flat gray soil and a scattering of sharp, angular stones, the kind you don't usually see in that part of the forest. The air felt stale, like a room with the windows closed too long. The trees at the edge of the circle were bent, not broken or chopped, bent back and away from the center, like something had pushed them outward from inside. Some of them had these dry, twisted ribbons of sap down the bark, curled and frozen in place like they'd been scorched. I didn't step in. Neither did Keever. He just shook his head slowly and said, "We'll leave that spot be." No explanation. No follow-up. He turned and started working a different line lower on the ridge. I didn't argue. That night, I was sleeping light. Cold made it hard to settle. Around maybe 2 or 3 in the morning, something slammed into the camper. Not brushed against it, not tapped. Slammed, hard enough to shake the walls. I jumped up, half convinced the bear had come looking for the waste barrel, but Keever was already outside. He had his flashlight out and was scanning the trees toward the ridge. Said he'd seen something moving. I asked if he thought it was a bear or maybe a stray dog. He didn't answer. Next morning, we found a neat little arrangement of rocks just outside the camper door. 14 of them, perfectly lined up by size, from biggest to smallest. Like someone had taken the time to measure and arrange them precisely. Keever looked at them, crushed them under his boot without saying a word, and muttered, "Don't leave anything out here overnight again." I hadn't, but I nodded anyway. Day 5, I got the skidder stuck near that same clearing. Front axle dipped into soft ground and I had to get down on my hands and knees to dig it out. While I was working, I realized something felt wrong. It was quiet. Not woods quiet, dead silent. No birds, no wind, no engine sounds. Just nothing, like the world was holding its breath. I looked up and saw something, just outside the clearing, crouched between 2 trees. It wasn't a person, and it wasn't any animal I recognized. It was low to the ground, pale, almost bluish. Skin looked raw, wet. It moved a little, shifting weight, and then slipped behind the trees without a sound. I stood there frozen for a beat, and before I could even say anything, Keever walked up behind me and said, "You saw it, didn't you?" That's when we started arguing. He wanted to leave. Said he was done, that something about this place wasn't right. I told him we were almost finished, that we just had a day or 2 left. He looked at me like I was trying to convince him to jump off a bridge. That night, I couldn't sleep. There was movement outside the camper. Not footsteps, more like slow, deliberate pacing. Something was circling us. Every few minutes, I'd hear a faint scrape or a rustle. I didn't open the door. I didn't move. I just lay there, boots still on, knife in hand, heart going like a drum in my ears. By dawn, the propane tank was gone. We found it later, upright, sitting perfectly centered inside that circle. No drag marks, no footprints, no explanation. The air inside that circle was warmer than outside, and it smelled like blood and metal. Like pennies left in the sun. Keever was done after that. He didn't pack, he just shoved everything into his duffel, told me good luck, and started walking down the road. Said he'd take 5 hours on foot over one more night up there. I stayed, mostly out of pride, I think. Or stubbornness, maybe a little of both. I didn't want to be the guy who ran off because the woods gave him the creeps. That last night, something climbed onto the roof. I heard it, scratching, shifting. It didn't walk, it crawled. I could hear the slow drag of limbs across metal, the faint creak of weight shifting. It circled once, then twice, then stopped. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. I lay there with the knife in my hand, listening to it settle. Eventually, I must have dozed off. When I opened my eyes, it was daylight, and there was something lying just inside the door. I hadn't opened the door. It was a bundle, twine-wrapped, made of leaves. Inside, a smooth black stone, a twist of fur, and one of Kiever cigarettes, the exact brand. He told me earlier he hadn't smoked in years, said it made him sick now. That was it for me. I tossed the whole thing into the stove without opening the camper door again, packed my gear, started the truck, and left without looking back. The frost hadn't even melted off the windows yet. On the drive down, something moved through the trees along the switchback. It kept pace with me for a while, low to the ground. Fast. I never got a clear look. It didn't make a sound. I made it to the main road just before sunset. Pulled into a gas station in Elkhorn and called Plenty from the payphone. Told him the site was clear. That was 11 years ago. Haven't taken a job north of the Blue Ridge since. I was 32 when I picked up a handyman job with this guy named Harlow. He ran a patchwork business renting out these old mountain cabins scattered through the Blue Ridge Hills. Harlow paid cash. He had this way of sizing you up with a single look, like he could smell whether or not you'd keep your mouth shut. Said he liked me because I knew how to mind my business. I guess I gave off that vibe. I just showed up, fixed what was broken, and kept quiet. That October, he asked if I could stay on site for a week or two to wrap up a string of repairs in one spot. Orley Gap, a narrow ridge about 20 miles up from the nearest town. The drive out was nothing but switchback gravel roads, sharp turns, and trees that closed in so tight you could barely see the sky. No cell signal, no power lines. The kind of place you never just stumble across. There were 6 cabins in that stretch, left over from some mining company back in the day. They sat in a crooked row along the tree line like bad teeth, all different angles and spacing, each one sinking into the hillside a little more than the last. Harlow gave me one to stay in while I worked. The other 4 were empty, just rotting boards and old wiring. The 6th one, the one at the far end past a narrow creek, was still occupied. He told me not to bother the guy who lived there, keeps to himself. Doesn't make a mess, he said. You won't even know he's there. But then he handed me a spare key to that cabin. Just in case there was a plumbing issue, he said. I remember looking at it in my hand, rusty old brass, with a faint bend in the middle like it had been copied too many times. I didn't think much of it at first. The days were long but quiet. I kept busy replacing busted floorboards, tightening up loose paneling, running new lines for some flickering fixtures. Nothing unusual. But at night, once everything went still, I started to notice little things. The first couple evenings, I heard footsteps on my porch. Just 1 or 2 at a time, not heavy, not rushing, just slow, like someone unsure whether they wanted to knock or not. The first night I wrote it off as deer. The second night, maybe a drunk who took a wrong turn. But it kept happening, always late close to 3 in the morning when everything else was dead quiet. I kept the door locked, didn't open the curtains, just waited it out. Then on the 8th morning, I found a note tucked behind the mesh of my screen door. It was written in this jagged, leaning handwriting that looked like it had been scratched into the paper more than written. It just said, "Too loud. Quiet down." Now, I hadn't made a single bit of noise. I didn't have a TV with me. No music. I'd been alone every night, eating canned soup and reading by flashlight. So it didn't make any sense. I figured I'd clear the air. Took the trail down to the last cabin. The path was overgrown and soft, like it hadn't been walked in months. The porch steps were coated in moss, each one sagging like wet cardboard. No tire tracks. No trash. Windows so coated in grime I couldn't even tell if there were curtains inside. I knocked. Waited. Nothing. That night, the footsteps came back. Heavier this time. I sat behind the curtain with the porch light on, waiting. After maybe 10 minutes, I cracked the door. Nothing. But I looked down and saw them. Bare footprints in the dust. Human. Adult. No shoes. No shoes. The prints led right up to the door, turned around, and vanished off into the yard. No drag marks. No prints going further, just gone. I left my own note the next morning. Wrote, "I haven't been making any noise. Maybe it's someone else." Folded it and wedged it under a flat stone by the end cabin's porch. The following day, the note was gone. In its place was a squirrel dead and neatly hollowed out. Skin intact, but the inside scooped clean like something had carved it with surgical care. It was laid right on the stone where I'd left my message. I didn't eat that day. Just worked fast, didn't take breaks. Around dusk, I hiked up to a ridge until I got enough signal to call Harlow. "You sure that last cabin's still occupied?" I asked. He went quiet for a moment, then said, "He's paid up." "That's all I need to know. Just finish the jobs and leave by the weekend." Thursday evening, I was in one of the empty units checking the ceiling fan. It had been rattling like crazy. While I was tightening the screws, I heard a loud scraping sound, like a table being dragged across a wooden floor. It came from inside the unit I was working in. I froze. Walked the whole cabin, room to room, every corner. Nothing. But when I came back to the living room, I saw my hammer, one I always kept in the kitchen drawer, sitting upright on the couch, balanced perfectly on its handle. I don't know how long I just stared at it. That night, I didn't stay. I drove down into the valley and found a cheap motel with buzzing lights and a broken vending machine. Didn't care. I locked the door and pushed the dresser against it. Next morning, I came back. My cabin screen door was wide open, just swinging gently. Inside, every fork from the kitchen drawer had been bent into tight spirals and laid out across the floor like some kind of pattern. No other signs of entry. "Nothing missing," I snapped. Took the spare key and marched straight to the end unit. I didn't knock this time. I opened the door and immediately gagged. The smell was thick and humid, sweet like rot, like meat left too long in standing water. The place was empty. No furniture, no curtains, no bed. Just dusty floors, bare walls, and that stench. In the center of the living room, arranged with almost obsessive care, were rows and rows of shoes. Dozens of pairs, children's sneakers, work boots, women's heels, sandals, mud-caked hiking boots. Some were old and crumbling. Others looked brand new. One pair looked exactly like the ones I was wearing. There were no closets, no bathroom, just one big room and the shoes. I backed out and called Harlow, told him everything. The squirrel, the hammer, the shoes, the smell. He didn't sound surprised. "That one's always been odd," he said slowly, "but he's never given me a reason to worry." "What does that even mean?" I asked. "Where'd you even find this guy?" "I didn't," he said. "That cabin came with the property. Lease was already there when I inherited it. I've never seen him, just get mailed rent like clockwork. I leave it be." That night I sat in my truck, parked with the engine off, doors locked. I didn't sleep, just watched the trees. Right before sunrise, someone knocked once, softly on my driver's side window. I jumped, heart pounding. Nothing there. But under the wiper blade was another note. "Shoes don't make the man, but they help him walk back." I started the engine and left. I texted Harlow from the next town, told him I was finished. He wired the final payment without comment. That was 5 years ago. I don't take jobs anymore. My cousin Lena needed help clearing out her dad's old house after he passed away. The place was way out in southern West Virginia, in a spot called Brooks Hollow. Not even really a town, just a name you might catch on a faded map if you looked hard enough. You wouldn't find it on your GPS, and even if you did, you'd probably think twice before making the drive. The house had been sitting empty for almost 10 years. Nature had started pulling it back in. Trees creeping up around the porch, fences falling into themselves, the whole property sagging like it was tired of waiting for someone to come home. Lena was flying in from Seattle and needed someone to go ahead of her, get the place opened up, clear a path, try to get the generator working so she wouldn't have to stumble around in the dark when she got there. I'd always been the family's go-to for weird little errands like this. I had the truck, I had the tools, and I guess I didn't have a good enough excuse not to. So I drove up the day before her flight. It was mid-October, already cold enough that you could see your breath if you stepped outside at night. The air felt thicker the closer I got, like it wasn't just colder, but heavier. Like there was more to carry with every step. I hadn't been back to Brooks Hollow since I was a kid, and even then, I didn't remember it being quite so quiet. When I got to the turnoff, I found the old metal gate rusted shut, padlocked, and sagging under years of weather and vine growth. I left the truck on the side of the road and walked in with bolt cutters, stepping over dead branches and slipping on mossy stones that had once been a proper gravel driveway. About halfway down the trail, I passed a tree with thick black paint across the bark. 3 wide stripes. Fresh. Still a little tacky to the touch, which I found out because I was curious enough to poke one. We used to do stuff like that as kids, mark trees with spray paint when we were trying to build our own trails to the woods. But those old marks had always faded into the bark, dulled by time and weather. These were different. Dark, clean, almost glossy. It made me slow down, but I didn't stop. Eventually, the trail opened up into a shallow clearing where the house still stood. Barely. 2 stories, maybe more once. The roof had collapsed in the back, probably under snow or a fallen tree, and one of the second-floor windows had been blown out completely. The whole place looked like it had been held together by a thread, and that thread had started to fray. I left the front door open while I worked, trying to get some air moving inside. The smell was sharp mildew, rot, old fabric, stale wood. Not quite unbearable, but close enough that you noticed it every time you inhaled. I spent the next few hours pushing around furniture, bagging up moldy clothes, shoving broken picture frames into the corners so I wouldn't step on the glass. There were photo albums on the shelf, most of them stuck together. I left those alone. It was just starting to get dark when I heard something hit the porch. A single thump, not loud, more like someone had dropped a boot out there. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped outside, expecting maybe a fallen branch or one of the porch posts finally giving out. There was nothing on the porch, but at the edge of the clearing, leaning against the sagging fence, was something tall, pale. At first, I thought it was a buck, big shoulders, long neck, light coat, but it wasn't quite right. It wasn't moving like an animal, it was standing. Upright. Its arms or maybe legs hung too low, like they hadn't settled into the right joints. The head tilted too far forward, and the whole shape of it was stretched. I didn't get a clear look. As soon as I raised the flashlight, it moved behind a tree and disappeared into the dark. I went back inside and locked the door. I told myself it was probably a deer with mange or something, maybe caught in a fence and limping, but I kept the crowbar close that night just in case. Sleep didn't come easy. Every time I started to drift, I'd hear something. Twigs snapping, leaves brushing against the siding, something dragging across the porch like wet rope. And once, right around 3, I heard breathing near the door. Deep, slow, like someone standing just outside the keyhole. I sat up and turned the lamp on. Silence. Just the hum of the old bulbs. By morning, I had convinced myself I'd imagined most of it. I was just tired. The place was creepy. That's all. Then I went out to check the truck. 2 of the tires had been slashed, clean cuts through thick rubber. The back window had a crack running from one corner to the other like someone had traced a blade across it. There weren't any footprints that I could see. No tracks. Just damage. I tried calling Lena. No service. Tried walking around with my phone in the air like an idiot. Still nothing. She wasn't due until the next morning. And even if I wanted to hike out to the main road, I wasn't sure I'd make it before dark. So I stayed. I told myself I'd get more done in the garage. I didn't. The whole time, I felt like I was being watched. Not just paranoia, something had shifted. I noticed more marks on the trees, new ones. A deep X carved clean into a trunk not 20 feet from the house. A perfect line of small stones across the dirt trail, each one spaced exactly the same distance apart. And by the outhouse, nailed right into the wood with 4 rusty railroad spikes, was a dead squirrel. Its eyes were missing. That was when I stopped pretending this was normal. I carried the crowbar with me the rest of the day. Every time I moved, I scanned the trees. Nothing moved, nothing made a sound, but the stillness felt deliberate. That night, I didn't even try to sleep. I sat in the living room with every lamp on, crowbar across my lap, staring at the front door like it owed me answers. Around 2 in the morning, I heard it again, footsteps on the porch. Not fast, just 1 step, then nothing, then another step. And Assel's words were gisted and breast rescue laters to the other 4 travel age inside of light. Long pauses in between, like it wanted me to hear it. Then the doorknob jiggled, twice, lightly, just enough to test it. And then silence. I didn't move. I sat there all night. The sun felt like a rescue when it finally came up. When I opened the door, I saw the prints, bare feet, but not human. The toes were long and clawed, the arches too wide, like whatever made them didn't care about walking right. And they weren't scattered. They were lined up perfectly, one in front of the other, as if something had approached the house in a straight line, paused, and disappeared. Still no word from Lena. I walked down toward the gate again, hoping to catch a signal, or maybe just breathe different air. That's when I saw it, off to the left of the path, maybe 20 feet into the trees, a clearing I hadn't noticed before. In the center were 5 small mounds of dirt, roughly person-sized. No shovels, no markers. Just soil, packed down like someone had done it by hand. I didn't go closer. I just backed up and turned around. I didn't run, but my heart was hammering the whole way back. When I got to the house, all the ground floor windows were scratched. Vertical lines, each one deep and deliberate, like someone or something had dragged claws straight down the glass. Every pane. I didn't even try the door. I grabbed my bag, the crowbar, my keys, whatever I could reach from the porch, and I walked. I walked until the forest started thinning out. Walked until the trees looked normal again. Walked until I saw a rusted mailbox with an actual name on it. I sat at a gas station for 2 hours before Lena showed up. She didn't believe a word of it. Thought I'd had some kind of breakdown from stress or lack of sleep. I didn't argue. She hired a cleanup crew the next week. They burned half the house down when they found the back wall collapsed into something that smelled too much like a pit. Mason always talked about the cabin like it was some kind of hidden paradise. Said October was the best time to go, cool air, perfect stillness, no tourists. Nobody around for miles, he told us, like that was a good thing. It was his grandfather's old hunting spot, buried somewhere near the Tennessee-Virginia border. A real middle-of-nowhere place, and for some reason that made it sound like the perfect getaway. So we went. Just the 3 of us, me, Mason, and his cousin Ellis. We packed light, clothes, gear, a cooler full of food, some whiskey, and Ellis's new crossbow he hadn't shut up about since July. The drive started off normal enough, but the farther we got, the less the road made sense. First it was cracked asphalt, then gravel, then just hard-packed dirt winding through trees that looked like they hadn't seen a chainsaw in 50 years. By the last leg of it, Mason was the only one driving. My car tapped out near a collapsed service trail, tires spinning in soft mud. I had to toss my bag in the bed of Mason's truck and ride the last 3 miles back there with the cooler and the gear sliding around. There were no signs, no mailboxes, just trees closing in tighter every turn, like we were being swallowed. My phone lost service maybe 10 minutes after we left the main road, and Ellis joked about how it felt like we were disappearing. At the time, it felt like the kind of thing you say when you're bored and the ride's too long. Now I can't stop thinking about it. The cabin didn't look like the kind of place you'd find on Airbnb. It leaned a little to one side, and the steps creaked like they weren't used to being walked on anymore. All the windows were nailed shut from the inside, not boarded, just nailed. Like someone had wanted to make sure nothing could open them from either side. Inside, though, it wasn't bad. Warm enough. A big stone fireplace took up half the main room, and the water ran clear even after we let the taps sputter for a few minutes. There were 3 beds, a bunch of old hunting magazines, and a locked cabinet that Mason didn't have the key for. We drank whiskey on the porch that first night, just watching the sky go dark behind the ridgeline. There weren't any city lights, so the stars looked huge. I think we all felt a little better once we'd settled in. The air was crisp, cold in that sharp way that tells you winter's coming. Ellis started telling stories once he got buzzed. Claimed he saw a wild boar the last time he'd come up here, said it had tusks longer than his hand and a patch of missing fur like it had been burned. He always told stories like that, half lies, half jokes. Mason didn't laugh though. He pointed out past the clearing and told us, real quiet, don't go west of that tree line. Ever. Ellis raised an eyebrow. Why not? What cursed ground? Old mines, Mason said. Deep shafts. Some of them never got mapped right. The ground's hollow in places. You step wrong, you drop straight through. There's a reason even locals don't hunt back there. One guy went missing 10 years ago. They never even found his boots. We didn't argue. It wasn't like we had a reason to go wandering. The next morning, Mason didn't get out of bed. Said his stomach felt like it was being twisted up. Pale, sweaty, shaky hands. Not hangover sick. Not hangover sick. Something else. He looked like his body had already given up on keeping anything inside. Ellis and I figured he needed rest, so we left him alone and took the crossbow out behind the cabin. Spent most of the morning setting up soda cans and empty bottles on a log and taking turns missing them. Ellis hit one dead on around noon and acted like he'd killed a bear. That was the high point of the day. By late afternoon, Ellis was looking rough too. He said his stomach hurt but tried to play it off like it was nothing. I told him maybe the sandwiches were bad. We'd all eaten from the same cooler, same bags of snacks, same drinks. It made sense. Then I started feeling it. It crept in slow, like a hand clenching in my gun. I thought maybe I just needed to lie down, but when I closed my eyes, the pain got worse, sharp, deep, like something was dragging itself along the inside of my ribs. Around 2 in the morning, I woke up gasping. I was soaked in sweat, freezing even though I had 2 blankets on. The fire had died down to glowing embers, and the only sound was this awful retching from the bathroom. It was Ellis. I could hear him choking and heaving, like his body was trying to tear something out. Then he went quiet, just long enough to make me worry. I got up, knees shaking, and walked down the hall. That's when I saw the smear. It was thick, dark, ran about 4 feet down the wall like something wet had been dragged by a hand. It wasn't blood, not exactly. Too brown, too greasy. I said Ellis's name. No answer. I pushed open the bathroom door. Empty, no Ellis. Just his phone on the sink, screen still lit. There was a puddle of vomit on the floor, dark, almost black, but no sign of where he went. No boots missing, no coat, nothing. I stepped out onto the porch, called his name again. Still nothing. The woods were pitch black. We hadn't taken flashlights out. I didn't hear a single branch snap. No animals, no wind, just dead, unnatural stillness. I went back in and knocked on Mason's door. He didn't answer. I opened it, and the smell hit me immediately, sour and metallic, like rusting meat. Mason was curled up, twitching, eyes glassy and unfocused. His lips moved, but no sound came out. His shirt clung to him, soaked through. I touched his arm. It was so cold it made my fingers ache. I grabbed the truck keys, tried calling again. No signal. Ellis's phone didn't work either. I threw on my coat and headed outside. That's when I saw him. Ellis was standing at the edge of the woods, shirtless, still, facing away. His arms hung straight down, and his heels were touching like he'd been placed there by someone with no idea how standing works. I called out. He didn't turn. I took a step forward. Something about his posture was wrong. Too stiff, too deliberate. Then he spun, fast, like he'd been pulled by a wire. His face was blank, pale, eyes dull, unfocused. His mouth opened, and something dropped out. It landed on the ground with a wet slap. I couldn't see what it was. Didn't want to. Then he stepped back, right into the woods, and vanished. I ran back inside, slammed the door, pushed the table in front of it. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. I checked on Mason again. Gone. Just a wet imprint on the bed where he'd been. Boots still under the chair. Jacket still hanging on the hook. I didn't hear him leave. I didn't hear anything. I sat down in the middle of the room with the fire poker and didn't move until sunlight started creeping through the cracks. Then I got in the truck and left. Didn't care about the noise. Didn't care about the road. I just drove until I reached my car. I switched vehicles without turning the engine off. Kept driving until I hit the edge of town. At the first gas station with a signal, I called the cops. They found the cabin. Found blood on the wall. Found drag marks out back. But no Mason. No Ellis. No Ellis. No footprints. No tracks. Just our stuff, scattered. Food half-eaten. Crossbow bolt stuck in the bathroom wall. They searched for 5 days. Dogs, drones, helicopters, nothing. I moved, changed everything. Number, job, apartment. I don't talk to anyone from that part of the country anymore. My cousin Lenny asked me to help out with this little harvest fair his church put together every fall down in Denton Hollow. It's tucked way down in Franklin County, Kentucky. They just sort of crumble into gravel and patches of grass and keep going anyway. That part of the state doesn't feel real sometimes. It's like something someone described to you once but never showed you, and you kind of had to imagine it from memory. Lenny ran most of the event. He'd been part of the church since forever, and he loved putting things together. Hay rides, booths, music, apple bobbing, the whole bit. He even had one of those oversized clipboards that made him look important, though it was just covered in chicken scratch notes and a half-drawn map of the parking layout. The fair took place mostly on church grounds, spilling into the general store lot next door, and it drew in a weird mix of people. You had your regulars, the local families, the churchgoers, old-timers who knew everyone's middle names, and then you had folks who came down from the hills, people who lived so far off the grid that I genuinely wasn't sure if they had electricity or a mailbox. They just showed up, quietly, like they'd come out of the trees. I was working one of the booths near the back, handing out warm cider and caramel apples wrapped in plastic. The air had that sharp October edge, not quite freezing, but cold enough that you kept your hands in your sleeves when you weren't doing something. The line moved slow. People chatting, kids running by with glow sticks like they were at a rave, except stickier and with way more screaming. Somewhere off to the side, a bluegrass band was trying to hold it together. The wind kept messing with their rhythm. One guy's banjo strap flew off mid-song and slapped him in the face, which would have been funny if it didn't feel like the weather was warning us to wrap it up early. Then, just as I was handing a cider to this older lady in a shawl, I heard someone shout, "Has anyone seen June?" At first, I didn't think much of it. Fairs are loud, people misplace their kids for 30 seconds. It happens. But then the voice came again, louder, cracking in the middle. "Please, I can't find my daughter. She's 4, her name is June." And everything kind of paused. I stepped around the side of the booth and scanned the crowd. That's when I saw her. This woman in a faded green coat that didn't fit quite right in muddy boots, hair tied back in one of those loose knots that said she left in a hurry. Her eyes were wide, but not like she was crying. It was worse, like she was holding everything in because if she let even one piece go, the rest would just fall apart. People started turning toward her. A few of the older women moved in, instinctively, like it was a reflex. They didn't even speak at first, just stood close to her. One of the church deacons came over, asking gentle questions. The mother kept repeating herself, same words, same tone, like she couldn't hear what anyone else was saying. She was just here. She had on a red jacket. I only looked away for a second. And that's when it got cold in a different way. There wasn't a breeze or anything. It was just the kind of still that settles in when something's gone wrong and no one wants to be the first to say it. The bluegrass band had already stopped playing, and for a second all you could hear was gravel shifting under people's shoes and that distant hum of the electric fryer from the funnel cake booth. Then, slowly, people started spreading out. You could hear her name echoing in different directions. "June, June, sweetie?" Voices that started strong and got a little more strained each time. The parents in the crowd grabbed their kids a little tighter. Someone went to get the sheriff, who'd been sitting in his cruiser just up the gravel road by the cemetery entrance, sipping coffee and probably watching the sunset before everything shifted. About 10, maybe 15 minutes later, a boy named Grady came running from behind the store. He was one of those wiry kids who always looked like he knew something he shouldn't, the kind who could climb anything and never made a sound doing it. He said he saw something moving near the tree line, past the brush and old pallets where folks dumped extra firewood. There was a well out that way, covered up but still standing. My uncle once told me that even the dogs wouldn't drink from it. Said the water turned bitter after something got into the ground back in the 40s. Nobody really talked about it, just walked wide around that part of the woods. Still, it was the only lead, so a few men grabbed flashlights and followed Grady down the trail. The rest of us didn't move much. We just waited. Some people paced. Others held their breath like they were trying to keep the air still enough for a little girl's footsteps. The mother stood on the church steps the whole time, arms crossed so tightly her knuckles were white, rocking back and forth just slightly, like she was trying to calm herself or keep time or both. We saw the flashlights bobbing through the trees first. A couple of beams, slow and heavy. Then the sheriff came into view, walking with that kind of pace you recognize immediately. Not fast, not rushed, just careful. 2 other men followed behind him, carrying a tarp stretched between them. No one moved, not even the wind. The sheriff stepped forward. The men lowered the tarp behind him. I didn't have to see what was underneath to know. The way the mother dropped just straight down like something had been cut, that said everything. Her scream didn't sound human. I don't say that to be dramatic. It just didn't sound like anything a throat should be able to make. Some people cried. Others turned away. Someone accidentally turned the music back on, just a little burst of banjo, and then immediately turned it off again like they couldn't believe they'd done it. The pieces came together slowly. June had wandered off. That much was clear. She must have gotten turned around in the dark, walked toward the trees. A truck coming in late, some family from out past Jackson, I think, took the corner too wide, trying to find parking near the edge of the lot. There were no lights out there, no reflectors, no cones. They didn't even realize they'd hit anything. The sheriff told them to go. Told everyone to go, really. There wasn't anything left to do. The fair was over. Lenny and I drove back in silence. The road twisted through the hills, and the moon followed us the whole way like it was trying to figure out what had just happened. I didn't say a word. Didn't want to. I just kept replaying that moment, that sound the mother made. I didn't even know her name. The next morning, I drove by the church, just to see. The doors were shut. A piece of paper was taped to the front. Pastor Harold's handwriting said there'd be no service that Sunday. Folks had already started leaving flowers. Little plush toys, too. I stayed in the truck. I couldn't make myself walk up those steps. 2 days later, I was cleaning out my coat pocket and found a crumpled newspaper clipping. It must have been handed out at the gas station. The photo hit me first. June in her red jacket, hair in 2 uneven braids, smiling like someone had just told her something funny and she didn't want to laugh too loud. The article was short. The driver wasn't being charged. He'd cooperated fully. Said he never saw her. The sheriff confirmed the lot was unlit, unmarked. Said it could have happened to anyone. At the bottom of the article, there was a quote from the mother. She loved the smell of apples in the fall. I told her to stay close. I looked away for just a second. That second is all it took. I won't ever forgive myself. I don't expect anyone else to either. I've never gone back to Denton Hollow. I don't do fall festivals anymore. I was 39 when I took a job fixing the siding on an old house way out past the end of Faro Creek Road, in one of those patches of McLean County, Tennessee, where the paved roads just give up and the forest takes over. I'm a carpenter, mostly solo, and I've made kind of a niche for myself taking the jobs other folks turn down. The house belonged to a man named Vernon Maddox. He was in his 60s, maybe early 70s, but hard to tell. That wiry mountain man kind of build, long hands, always wore boots even in the house. He talked with that slow kind of voice that made everything sound like it wasn't your business unless he said otherwise. Paid me in a thick envelope of cash, which wasn't unusual for these parts. Said he wanted the south and west siding replaced before winter hit. No frills, just sturdy and sealed. The house itself was a long, low-slung ranch style built halfway into a slope, so from the front it looked one story, but from the back it dropped down to a walkout basement. The siding was cracked and faded to that washed-out gray most colors turn after 20 years of sun. No cell signal unless you drove 2 miles uphill and parked near a rusted gate. I asked if there was a motel nearby, and Vernon just kind of looked at me and said, "There's a tool shed out back." So I stayed in the shed. It wasn't much, just a dusty space with a concrete floor, a couple of spiders, and some old garden tools. But I had a cot and a cooler, and it was only supposed to be for 10 days or so. I didn't mind. At first. The weirdness started maybe 5 days in. Nothing dramatic. Just little things. The nights felt too long. I'd crash around 10 every night, exhausted after a full day stripping and replacing siding. I'd wake up feeling like I'd been out for 8 hours easy, but it'd still be pitch dark. I'd check my watch, 1:20, sometimes 1:50, and not in that groggy, half-asleep way. I was fully alert, eyes wide, heart thumping like I'd slept too deeply. It kept happening night after night. It didn't feel like insomnia, more like something was nudging me awake. By the 4th night, I was tired and on edge. Around 3 in the morning, I stepped out of the shed to use the bathroom. Just a tree out near the edge of the clearing, and that's when I saw her. At the tree line, maybe 30 or 40 feet away, there was someone walking. I couldn't see her face, but she was moving in this slow, off-kilter way, like her knees didn't bend properly. Looked like a woman, long pale dress clinging to her legs, dragging across the underbrush. No flashlight, no sound, just that slow, unnatural movement. I figured maybe she was lost. There's a handful of old hiking trails out here, and people do get turned around, so I called out. Nothing loud, just a, "Hey, you okay?" She didn't turn, didn't stop. Just kept walking behind the shed, down toward the hollow that dipped into the woods. I grabbed my flashlight and circled around. Nothing, no movement, no sound. The leaves weren't even crunching, just still air and empty dark. I stood there for a good 5 minutes trying to catch any sign of movement, but it felt like I was the only person left in the whole woods. The next morning, over coffee, I asked Vernon if he ever saw people walking out there. He barely looked up, just muttered, "Not since the spring dried up." I asked what he meant, and he kind of waved his hand in the air, like brushing away smoke. "Old story," he said. "Don't let it get in your head." He didn't say anything else. That afternoon, while working on the west wall, I came across a weird detail. There was a small, narrow window, completely sealed from the inside, not framed right. It had clearly been covered up years ago. What was strange wasn't just the fact it was sealed, it was the location. It faced directly into a thicket of brush and trees. No view, no purpose. I knocked on the glass out of curiosity. It echoed hollow. Later, I asked Vernon if he wanted me to clear it out or leave it sealed. He didn't even pause before saying, "No, leave it shut." Not, "I'll think about it," or "Let me check." Just, "Leave it shut." That was when I started sleeping with a knife beside the cot. Night 5, I was woken by breathing. Close breathing. Not mine. It was wet. That's the word that came to mind. A heavy, wet inhale, long exhale, like someone had just come up from a swim and couldn't quite catch their breath. I held still, didn't even blink, just listened. Another breath. Slow. Dragged out. I reached over and flicked on the lantern. Silence. I opened the shed door and swept the area with my flashlight. The clearing was empty, but when I turned to check the back wall of the shed, I saw it. A handprint. Damp. About 6 feet up the wall. The size of a kid's hand, but the fingers were wrong. Too long. Not deformed exactly, just stretched, uncomfortable. I stood out there until the sun came up, knife in one hand, flashlight in the other. Next morning, I told Vernon I needed to head out early. Said I could finish up the last stretch another time. He didn't argue, just nodded and said, "You're probably right. Best not to hang around here after October rolls in." I hesitated. "Why's that?" He gave a small shrug. "Some places keep their dead too close, and sometimes they don't want to be kept." That was the last thing he said to me before I started loading up. Right as I was getting into the truck, he came out carrying something wrapped in a rag. Said this was my brother's. Kept him safe far as I know. I didn't really want it, but I didn't want to offend him either. Inside the cloth was a carved wooden charm rough, but clearly handmade. Strange symbols I didn't recognize. Appalachian folk stuff, probably. I hung it from my rearview mirror and headed out. About 45 minutes into the drive, on a narrow dirt trail through the woods, I saw something. A woman, standing in the middle of the path. Same pale dress. Soaked. Head down, hair hanging wet across her face, arms hanging like she was too tired to lift them. I hit the brakes hard. My tires skidded in the mud. I jumped out with the flashlight. She was gone. No tracks, no rustle, just cold, silent woods. And that same stretched out moment, like time had tripped over itself. When I got back home, I tossed the talisman in a drawer and tried not to think about it. 3 days later, I started hearing water, dripping, always at night, always from different parts of the house. I checked the pipes, the ceilings, under the sink. Nothing. No moisture, no leaks, just the sound. One morning, I opened the drawer to grab my wallet and the charm was gone. I found it hanging from the curtain rod in my bedroom. Perfectly centered, twisting in place. I don't work in Eastern Tennessee anymore.